So now let's move into step 4. This is our descriptive statistics. We've only got numeric variables. So remember we said we use the summarize command for numeric variables. When we have numeric variables in the descriptive statistics, the thing that we're really interested in is determining normality. It's not super important at this point. It's good to have it at this point. It's not the end of the world. But later on when we get to other analyses, this will actually be an embedded assumption. Now, just as a very quick reminder, normality has 5 features, and we use our descriptive or our summarize command. We also use histograms, but we can also use Shapiro-Wilk. We're not going to look at Shapiro-Wilk today. It is an option and something that you should use, simply because it gives you another piece of evidence to determine whether or not a distribution is normal. But it certainly is not the only thing. So even though you can use Shapiro-Wilk as another piece of information, please do not rely on it. Yeah, really rely on your histogram and your descriptives. Shapiro-Wilk is just another nail in the box, if you will. So normality has 5 features. The first is central tendency, and with central tendency we want the mean to be approximately the same as the median and approximately the same as the mode. We want our variability, so we want our standard deviations to be greater than 0, generally speaking. For skew, we want our skew statistic to be approximately 0, so that means it would be a symmetrical distribution. If our skew statistic is less than 0, it means that we have a negative skew. And if our skew is greater than 0, then we have a positive skew. But again, symmetrical distributions will be around 0, so a little bit either side is not a big problem. And remember, with skew, there are no formal cutoffs. So it's not like, all right, it's at 0.51, it's now a positive skew. It's not like that. This gives you an indication of which direction the skew is going, and then you're going to use your histogram to confer it. Kurtosis works very similar to skew, but instead of aiming for approximately 0, we aim for approximately 3. And if we have a kurtosis statistic of approximately 3, we call the distribution mesokurtic. If the kurtosis is less than 3, we call it platykurtic, and if the kurtosis is greater than 3, we call it leptokurtic. So remember that mesokurtic simply means it looks normal. Platykurtic means it's really, really flat, and it's a really long or wide distribution, and leptokurtic means it's really narrow and really high. Modality is the final assumption of normality. You can only assess normality using a histogram. So you can't assess it with statistics. We don't have anything that fancy just yet. And modality is all about how many humps does your data camel have. So when I say data camel, if I draw up a normal distribution, this distribution has a single hump. So this is a one hump data camel. On the other hand, if my distribution goes like this, and I'll show you why I'm drawing them two separate ones in a second, then I've got a 2-hump data camel, and we will call this bimodal. If I had 3 humps, I would call it multimodal, and anything above 3 is multimodal. Now, just as a reminder with modality, I'm not looking for something that looks like this and saying, oh, look at that, that's bimodal. That's not bimodal, that's still unimodal. I can still represent it with a single hump. All that's happened is that I've undersampled one section. This happens all the time in the real world. It's not the end of the world. It's not a problem. On the other hand, if what my data actually looks like is like this, so it goes up, it peaks, it comes all the way back down, and then it goes back up again, comes all the way back down, it's very, very clear, not that I necessarily have got 2 humps, but more to the point that I have 2 distributions. So what you're really looking for with modality is whether or not it looks like you have more than one distribution going on. So let's use our summarize command. I'm going from attain to stait, so I could write out all of my variables one by one, but using this hyphen in between with no spaces, it'll just capture everything. And then we're going to use the detail command to grab all the specifics. Let's go through these very quickly. There's a lot, but it won't take us very long. So this gives us our median, which is our 50 percentile, and our mean, but it doesn't give us our mode. Now this isn't a big deal. So, if you remember last week, I spoke about the relationship between the mean, median, and mode with outliers. So if I have a normal distribution like this, my mean, median, and mode would all sit on top of each other, right? Now let's use different colors. Let's use that color for median and that color for mode. They'd all be approximately on top of each other. But as a tail comes out, so as I get more skew, in this case I have positive skew, what's going to happen is that my median is going to move up a bit, but my mode is also going to, my mean is going to move up even further. However, my mode will stay exactly where it is, because the mode is just the most common point. So what this means is that if you have a normal distribution, your mean, median, mode would all be on top of each other, but in any other circumstance they won't be. Your mean and your median will start to move away, and your mean will move away at a greater rate. So what this means is that if your mean and your median are basically the same number, the odds are they're on top of the mode. So looking at this, 5.5 and 5.1, I'd say that's perfectly fine. That looks like we have central tendency. Our standard deviations are greater than 1. Our skewness is negative 0.5, suggesting a slight negative skew to some extent. And our kurtosis is 2.5, suggesting that it might be platykurtic. Again, that's just going off these statistics, and that's what we're going to do from this point onwards throughout today. But remember, it's not enough to just go from here. So that was for attain. If we move on to own, and own here is own discrepancy, so it's discrepancy from your own ideal. I can see that my median is 1, my mean is 1.3, so central tendency looks fine. Standard deviation is 1.2, this is good. My skewness is 0.02, that is basically symmetrical. You're not going to get closer to 0 in a real population. And kurtosis is 3.3, so it's a little bit on the leptokurtic side, but otherwise looks okay. Culture, median of 2, mean of 2.26, so central tendency is met. Standard deviations are above 0. Skewness is negative 0.05, so it's a little bit negative skew, but I would say that's otherwise fine. And your kurtosis is almost 3, so it looks like we do have a mesokurtic distribution. Moving on to trait. Now remember, trait is trait objectification. So this is your preference for appearance over physical aptitude. And we can see here that our median is 7, but our mean is 3.48. So this is suggesting that actually we might have a little bit of a negative skew going on, and it might be problematic. And I'm suggesting that it's a negative skew because my mean is lower than my median. And if you remember when I drew out the graph, the mean trails or follows the skew more so than the median, generally speaking. My standard deviation is certainly above 0. And my skewness is negative. It's negative 0.34. And so this confirms my suspicions by looking at the mean and median that there was a negative skew. And here we can see our kurtosis is 1.96, suggesting that it's platykurtic. Now if we move down to self-esteem, my median is 5.7, my mean is 5.49, so I'm happy with this. Standard deviations are above 0. My skewness is negative 0.74, suggesting that there might be a negative skew going on. My kurtosis literally rounds to 3, so that's as close to a mesokurtic distribution as you're going to get. Now we have 3 special measures which we haven't spoken about that are going to be called surveillance, shame, and control. This is not the shame we're going to be using in our analyses. This is a different way of looking at shame. So for surveillance, our median is 5, our mean is 4.87. This looks fine. Standard deviation is above 0. Skewness is negative, and slightly leptokurtic distribution based off the statistic. I suspect if we looked at the histogram, it would be fine though. For shame, our median is 3.37. It looks like we do, in fact, well, that's as close as you're going to get the two on top of each other. Standard deviation is above 0. Kurtosis is slightly positive, skewness is slightly positive, whilst our kurtosis is slightly platykurtic. For shame, it looks like our mean and median are on top of each other. Notice here that our mean is basically 0. So what this is saying is our mean is negative 1.46, but that decimal places should actually be 15 zeros to the left. So this negative 1.46 is more like negative 0.00000, so on and so forth, 146. So it's basically 0. Standard deviations are certainly above 0. Skewness is as close to symmetrical as you would get. Kurtosis, slightly platypodic, but otherwise fine. Negative affect, central tendency looks fine. Variability looks fine. Skewness looks quite positively skewed, actually. And I guess if we do look here, we can see that our percentiles are all 1 up until the median, sorry. And then we get a lot more variability up the upper end. And our mean is, in fact, a little bit higher than our median. So that does suggest that positive skew is going on. And our kurtosis is suggesting quite strongly that it's leptokurtic as well. Now we move on to depression. Central tendency looks fine. Variability looks fine. Skewness is looking like it might be positively skewed. And it looks like we have a leptokurtic distribution as well. And then anxiety, central tendency looks fine, variability looks fine. Again, slightly positive, slightly leptokurtic. For depression and anxiety, this is actually almost expected. Generally speaking, when you look at depression and anxiety in a general population, you're not going to expect high levels. Generally speaking, everyone has a little bit of depression and a little bit of anxiety, but we're usually down the bottom end. So it's quite normal to get positive skew in depression and anxiety.